Well, our guest today is Alice Carriere. Did I get that right, Alice?
You did. Perfection.
All right.
Yeah.
And you are the author of Everything, Nothing, Someone, which is in itself an intriguing title.
Thank you.
First, tell us about this is a coming of age story in the 90s, and you are the daughter of some reasonably famous parents. So tell us a little bit about your mom and dad before we get into the book.
Yes. So my mother was Jennifer Bartlett. She was a renowned painter, originally from California. And she was known for working on a massive scale known for the scale of her paintings, the scale of her ambition, the scale of her grandiosity, the scale of her loud voice. And she's my favorite painter, but I'm a little biased. And she was subjected to let's say the experimentation of an overzealous psychiatrist who implanted memories of ritualized childhood sexual abuse and murder. And in response, my mother turned those memories into art and turned away from closeness with other people. And I think her work and her connection to her work and this equally elaborate creation of these memories were keystones to her personality and to our relationship. My father, on the other hand, was a European film star and intellectual who treated parenthood as a radical experiment in the total annihilation of boundaries. So he was the protege of the famous philosopher Gilles Deleuze in the 70s. And he, I think, used me in a way as a testing ground for a lot of the theories with which he was indoctrinated. So I think he and my mother there were some parallels there in terms of indoctrination and in terms of using their child as another medium for exploration and experimentation and art and abstraction.
Wow. Okay. And this is your very first book. And as I was reading it, I was thinking it's more a journey through hell and back. And tell us about your early life in that big house. And where was that house? And who were some of the celebrities who hung out there?
So it was a massive modern mansion in the West Village of New York City on Charles between Greenwich and Washington. And it was 17,000 square feet. It had an indoor pool. It had been, and it had 2 layers of lush, beautiful gardens. And what's so extraordinary was that it had been a factory for manufacturing train parts when trains ran along the West Side Highway. And my mother, who is incredible at sort of seeing beyond, seeing what something can be, seeing the potential in something. And she saw this, dilapidated factory and transformed it into this incredible space. It had 2 floors of studios. She slept in the pool room right next to the lap pool. And she meticulously landscaped the garden. And she was friends with, the writer Joan Didion, the actor, writer, and art collector Steve Martin, Susan Sarandon, Julia Roberts. The name dropping feels weird, but Deborah Eisenberg, the iconic short story writer, she was friends with a lot of really creative, extraordinary people. The musician John Cale from the Velvet Underground. The dancer Merce Cunningham and Misha Baryshnikov. So I was obviously too young to appreciate these luminaries, but as I grew older, I felt very grateful for being surrounded by all these exceptionally talented, interesting, complicated people.
And yet, I think you were alone and very maybe sad or confused.
Exactly. It was a place of abundance and of absence. My mother had a really hard time communicating emotions, being affectionate. She was lost entirely in her own world and in these memories of satanic abuse. And my father was traveling constantly, making movies. And then when he was around, it was an inappropriate kind of attention, which took me years to negotiate and which was itself warped by my own parallel indoctrination by psychiatrists and therapists, which came later, making me believe that he had molested me and making me believe that he was this kind of monster. So I was alone in my room listening to audiobooks and thinking in the third person, which was the beginning of my dissociative disorder, but also the beginning of my life as a writer, because I metabolized everything through storytelling. And I would sit in my room listening to audiobooks, and then I would narrate my own actions to myself. I would say, she is walking down the street, the rain falls on her jacket. And I would sort of turn myself into a story. And that's the way that I metabolized the chaos around me.
Wow.
And I was raised, by this incredible British nanny who was the person who really grounded me. But, there was not a lot of grounding. I spent a lot of time with my German family in a small town called Lübeck, and they were themselves burdened with a tremendous amount of damage. My uncle had committed suicide at 26. Another baby had been killed as it was being born. So there was a lot of pain in addition to all of the privilege.
And so you descended into a sort of psychosis and went into a treatment facility, right?
Well, the psychosis came later, and that was actually a result of the quote unquote treatment. So when I reached adolescence, I developed a dissociative disorder called depersonalization, where I couldn't recognize my own face in the mirror. I didn't know where the words I spoke were coming from. I was convinced I didn't exist. I had no connection to my history, my feelings, my body. I became nothing. And I reacted to this but with self-harm in the form of cutting, burning, substance abuse, self-destructive relationships. And then doctors responded to that by prescribing more and more and more and more medication. And at one point, I was on 9 different medications, and the combinations of prescribed pharmaceuticals, triggered a massive psychotic episode that lasted a year and nearly killed me.
Oof.
Which again, I think indicates this sort of intersection of what can be a privilege, which is access to help, and also what can be a curse, this over-medication that itself nearly killed me, but was disguised as help.
Yes, most definitely. Well, you decided somewhere along the line to get out of this mess that you were in. And I think you fell in love, maybe?
Most definitely. And it's interesting because there are 2 loves that you could be talking about. One is my love of writing and my calling as a writer, because before I met, spoiler alert, my husband, my partner of 15 years, Gregory, my love was writing. I mean, I've known since I was 6 years old that I wanted to be a writer. And that was my only tether to reality and to myself until I met him. And we met when we were both very ill. I was being over-medicated. I was about to become psychotic. He is a recovering addict and alcoholic. And then we came back together as healthier people. And his fastidious care and compassion and optimism and kindness really taught me how to turn outward and connect. And because of him, I was able to connect with my mother when she descended into dementia. I was able to confront and communicate with my father, from whom I'd been estranged for 12 years. And I was able to write myself into a place of deep, deep, deep empathy for the people around me, and finally feel for others and become someone. And this, this love story is a developing story. It's still going on. And he's beyond being an extraordinary romantic partner. He's also really inextricably connected to how I work. I edited the book by reading the entire manuscript aloud to him 7 times. Wow. And he would pace back and forth, and then he'd go, "Wait, what are you trying to say?" And then we shout sentences at each other, and then one of us will go, "That's it," and then we high five. So that's my process.
That's awesome.
And he is central to it.
That is really awesome. And how long did it take you to write this book?
Oh, well, I've never not been writing it, I could argue. I've been, on a gurney scribbling away. I treat all of the primary sources from, my nanny's little journal she kept about myself, to the court papers, to case studies. It was all material. And, writing it kept me alive. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote.
How did you learn to write? How did you learn?
You know what? I have no idea. I don't know if it was the constant audiobooks in my ear. My mother was just a ravenous reader. She devoured books. So she instilled that love in me. But, the voice, I think my voice really came from the fact that it was triage. Writing was triage to try and keep myself alive and stanch the bleeding, the emotional bleeding, and make sense of things. I feel when I write, it's the only place I feel safe to make a decision. It's the only place I feel like myself. And possibly that comes through that feeling of it being a respite, that feeling of not falling through infinite space for once, which is what I feel in my dissociative disorder.
And it's beautiful.
And I didn't major in it in college. I didn't study it. So it's as much a mystery to me as it is to you.
I think it comes from the heart, from the very depths of you. Yes, it's beautifully done.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
What was the toughest thing about telling your own story?
This might come as a surprise, but the happy parts. They were so hard to write about. The love story was a really hard nut to crack. For some reason, writing about dissociation, even though it's so difficult to articulate and find the words for, it was precisely the challenge of finding those words that kept me from getting completely lost. So that felt easier. But the happy stuff, trying to write about a great love without being overly sentimental or saccharine or sounding inauthentic, that was a huge challenge.
That's not
so
to me. I mean,
really?
Yeah. In what ways has this story been cathartic for you?
Oh, in every way. I've learned so much. It was interesting. After I finished one of the last drafts, and it was interesting when I landed on the title, I got to, with the title in mind, go back and sort of re-meet my story and introduce myself to myself. So it's been extraordinary for somebody who dissociates to be grounded, and then also to find all of the kind of poetry and parallels that are just lying scattered around my life. And it's also, I understand my parents so deeply, and I have no lingering resentment, no anger. I feel that I've hopefully humanized them to themselves, because I think my mother really resisted the condition of humanness. She was very uncomfortable with being a human. She called herself an alien. She had such a hard time connecting, opening up to people, being intimate emotionally, physically. And I really hope that I mean, she died a year ago, and that's what I really wish I could have introduced her to herself, as I've done for myself. And it's also brought me back to my father. We have an incredible relationship now. It's given me back a father. And he's so proud of this book. I mean, I can't imagine if someone had written a book about me like this. And I'm very proud of him, how he's handling it. But it's brought me much closer to myself and other people. And it continues to connect me with people. I mean, just the fact that I'm sitting here right now with you talking about it. And it's a really thrilling experience, and it continues to deepen.
Did you have a hard time finding a publisher for the book? And how did you find the agent?
Oh, so yes, I did. I'll start with the agent. I was very, very lucky, and I sent the original manuscript, which was very, very different. It was called Hospital, and it was a collection of essentially short stories about every time I brought myself or someone else to emergency room or hospital. It was really insular. It was very cerebral. And I gave it to a friend, and he flipped for it. He's a poet, Bob Holman, incredible poet. And he sent it to Kim Witherspoon, who's my agent. And I was not expecting it, but I got an email from her saying she was thoroughly captivated. And I started weeping. And then I met with her, and then she was my agent. And then it got rejected over and over and over and over again. And then in the middle of it, I had another major dissociative episode, actually. And that motivated me to confront my father, because I needed to rebuild myself out of the raw materials of my life. And I confronted him, and we had this revelatory encounter. And then I wrote a second book, and then I combined those two, and a completely different book emerged, and a completely different person emerged. And that's when my editor, Julie Grau of Spiegel and Grau, the absolute dream publisher, I worship them. Julie saw it, understood it. And I can't believe I get to work with her. But yes, it was difficult to find a publisher and someone who understood and saw the magic, but it happened.
Yes, it did. And they're such a respected publisher too.
Yes.
What do you want women to take away from this book?
I would like this book to be an anchor, first of all, an anchor for anyone in the dissociative void. I want anyone who is experiencing dissociation from the inside to have help in explaining what it's like. And then I want people who are outside of the experience to gain an understanding of it. I think what I've learned from living this life and writing it down is this book is about how so many things can be true at the same time. And the real struggle is staying coherent in that revelation and not splintering to accommodate everybody else's truth, but also to look beyond one's own.
That's beautifully said. Beautifully
Thank
said.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, so what's next for you, Alice?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm working on 2 new books. They're both fiction. And what I will say about them is they came. So I'm a very anxious person and I ruminate constantly. And I was ruminating about my two biggest fears in the world. And I realized I was wasting so much time being afraid. So I just said, put it in a damn book so that your ruminating is actually work. So that is the origin story of these two new projects. And what's next is just, publication day of Everything, Nothing, Someone on August 29th. And, doing everything I can to help people connect with it and hopefully, help people and it'll resonate. And yeah.
That's great. I think that we will give it about 10 stars instead of just 5.
Thank you. Off the scales. Develop a new scale for it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice Carriere. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a total thrill.